The Second World War saw the evolution of warfare on an unprecedented scale, transforming battlefields on land and sea, and crucially, in the air. Among the most transformative and debated aspects of this conflict were the strategic bombing campaigns, which aimed to cripple an enemy's capacity to wage war from afar. Strategic bombing represented a radical departure from traditional combat. It sought not merely to support ground troops, but to directly assault an enemy's industrial infrastructure, transportation networks, and civilian morale, turning entire cities into targets. The theoretical foundations for strategic bombing were laid decades earlier by figures like Italian General Giulio Douhet and American Brigadier General Billy Mitchell, who famously declared that the bomber will always get through. They envisioned air power as a decisive weapon, capable of winning wars by itself. Early in the war, the destructive potential of this new form of warfare was brutally demonstrated. The Luftwaffe's aerial bombardments of Guernica in 1937, Warsaw in September 1939, and Rotterdam in May 1940, followed by the sustained London Blitz from September 1940 to May 1941, offered a grim preview of the devastation to come. On the Allied side, two major forces led the strategic bombing effort: the Royal Air Force, RAF, Bomber Command, and the United States Army Air Forces, USAAF. Each approached the challenge with distinct doctrines and formidable aircraft. Air Chief Marshal Sir Arthur Bomber Harris, the stern and uncompromising Commander-in-Chief of RAF Bomber Command from 1942, became the architect of area bombing. Operating primarily at night, his strategy focused on destroying German industrial cities, aiming to break civilian morale and cripple the workforce, a concept sometimes referred to as dehousing. The backbone of Bomber Command's fleet were heavy bombers like the Avro, Lancaster, and the Handley Page Halifax. These aircraft, often flying in massive formations under the cover of darkness, carried immense bomb loads, delivering destruction across German urban landscapes. The USAAF, under generals like Karl Spaatz and Ira Eaker, pursued a different philosophy: daylight precision bombing. Their strategy aimed to target specific industrial facilities, such as aircraft factories, oil refineries, and ball bearing plants, believing that focused attacks could dismantle the German war machine. Key to the American effort were the Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress and the consolidated B-24 Liberator, celebrated for their robust construction and defensive armament. These bombers initially flew in tightly packed combat box formations, hoping their combined firepower could ward off Luftwaffe interceptors. However, early unescorted daylight raids proved incredibly costly. The critical breakthrough came with the widespread deployment of long-range escort fighters, most notably the North American P-51 Mustang, equipped with external drop tanks, which could accompany bombers deep into enemy territory. The Allied strategic bombing efforts were formalized in the Combined Bomber Offensive, CBO, agreed upon at the Casablanca Conference in January 1943. This directive called for round-the-clock bombing, with the USAF striking by day and the RAF continuing its night operations. Point-blank directive, issued in June 1943, further prioritized targets for the CBO. Its primary goal was the destruction of the German fighter aircraft industry, followed by facilities producing ball bearings, oil, and synthetic rubber, all vital components of the Axis war machine. The German Luftwaffe, commanded by Hermann Göring, was initially designed primarily for tactical support of the Blitzkrieg ground forces. Its medium bombers, such as the Heinkel He-111, Tornado 17, and Junkers Ju-88, were effective in close air support and limited conventional bombing. However, the Luftwaffe possessed neither the doctrine nor the heavy bomber fleet for a sustained strategic bombing campaign against distant, industrial targets comparable to the Allies. Its focus shifted increasingly to air defense as the Allied bombing offensive intensified. In the Pacific, the Imperial Japanese Air Service and Navy Air Service also lacked a dedicated strategic bombing doctrine. Their aircraft, like the Mitsubishi G4M Betty bomber, were primarily used for tactical support, naval operations, and island assaults. not systematic industrial destruction. The early years of the war witnessed the devastating tactical use of air power. In September 1939, the Luftwaffe's relentless bombing of Warsaw shattered Polish resistance, while in May 1940, its attacks on Rotterdam and other cities hastened the collapse of the Netherlands and France. The Battle of Britain from July to October 1940 was the first major campaign fought entirely by air forces. The Luftwaffe initially targeted RAF airfields and radar stations, then shifted to terror bombing of London during the Blitz. However, RAF Fighter Command, under Air Chief Marshal Sir Hugh Dowding, successfully defended Britain, preventing a German invasion. Following this, RAF Bomber Command commenced its nighttime area bombing campaign against German industrial areas. These early missions, however, were often hampered by rudimentary navigation technology, leading to considerable inaccuracy. By 1942, the USAAF's 8th Air Force began deploying to England, conducting its first raids over occupied Europe. This marked the beginning of the round-the-clock bombing strategy envisioned by the Casablanca Directive. A year later, one of the most destructive early operations was Operation Gomorrah, a series of Allied raids on Hamburg from July 24 to August 3, 1943, combining RAF night area bombing with USAAF daylight precision attacks. These raids ignited a massive firestorm, killing an estimated 40,000 to 50,000 people and devastating vast swathes of the city. The extreme vulnerability of unescorted daylight bombers was brutally highlighted by the Schweinfurt-Regensburg raids in August and October 1943, targeting vital ball-bearing factories deep inside Germany. These missions saw devastating losses for the B-17 formations. Black Thursday, October 14, 1943, saw 60 B-17s shot down out of 291 attacking Schweinfurt, forcing a temporary cessation of deep penetration daylight raids until effective long-range fighter escorts could be deployed. The tide turned decisively in 1944, with the widespread deployment of long-range escort fighters, particularly the North American P-51 Mustang. With their extended range due to external fuel tanks, these fighters could protect bombers all the way to their targets and back. This shift culminated in Big Week, also known as Operation Argument, from February 20 to 25, 1944. During this period, sustained USAAF raids targeted German aircraft production facilities. The ensuing air battles decimated the Luftwaffe's fighter arm, effectively winning air superiority over Europe. With air superiority achieved, the Allied bombing effort intensified and became more focused. The oil plan targeted synthetic oil plants like those at Leuna and Pölitz, severely crippling Germany's fuel supply and its ability to mechanize its forces. Leading up to D-Day in June 1944, the transportation plan systematically bombed rail lines, marshalling yards, and bridges across France and Germany. This campaign isolated the battlefield and significantly hindered German troop and supply movements. One of the most controversial events was the bombing of Dresden from February 13-15, 45 by both RAF and USAF forces. While considered a vital transportation hub, the city was also packed with refugees. The raids generated immense firestorms, causing an estimated 25,000 to 35,000 casualties and sparking enduring ethical debate. In the Pacific Theater, the strategic bombing campaign evolved differently. The initial Doolittle raid on April 18, 1942, though small, was a crucial morale booster, launching 16 B-25B Mitchell bombers from the USS Hornet against Tokyo and other Japanese cities. However, the truly devastating aerial offensive began in late 1944 with the deployment of the Boeing B-29 Superfortress from bases in the Mariana Islands, Saipan, Tinian, and Guam. These advanced heavy bombers brought the war directly to the Japanese home islands under the command of General Curtis LeMay, who took charge of the Xwenkanim Bomber Command, later 20th Air Force, in January 1945. The strategy shifted dramatically. LeMay abandoned high-altitude precision bombing for low-altitude, 5,000 to 9,000 feet, night incendiary raids against Japanese cities. The most infamous of these was the Tokyo firebombing on March 9 to 10, 1945, codenamed Operation Meeting House. This single raid killed an estimated 100,000 people and destroyed 16 square miles of the city, making it arguably the most destructive conventional air raid in history. The strategic bombing campaign against Japan culminated in the atomic bombings. On August 6, 1945, the B-29 Enola Gay dropped the Little Boy atomic bomb on Hiroshima. 3 days later, on August 9th, the B-29 Boxcar delivered the Fat Man bomb to Nagasaki. These horrific attacks, combined with the Soviet Union's entry into the war, led to Japan's unconditional surrender on August 15, 1945. Bringing the devastating global conflict to an end, the consequences of strategic bombing were immense and far-reaching. Millions of civilians across Europe and Asia were killed, injured, or displaced. Entire cities, including Berlin, Hamburg, Cologne, Dresden, Tokyo, Hiroshima, and Nagasaki, lay in ruins. Industrial capacity, particularly in Germany and Japan, was severely crippled, especially in the later stages of the war. Production of vital war materials declined drastically, hindering their ability to sustain their war efforts. For Germany, the bombing forced a massive diversion of resources, including anti-aircraft artillery and fighter production, away from the eastern and western fronts. This stretched their capabilities and limited their operational mobility. Beyond the material destruction and military impact, strategic bombing ignited profound ethical debates that continue to this day. The morality and legality of deliberately targeting civilian populations became a central point of contention, raising questions about the acceptable limits of warfare. The effectiveness of strategic bombing in winning World War II remains a subject of ongoing historical debate. While it undeniably hampered Axis war production, drained their resources, and arguably shortened the conflict, it did not achieve victory on its own. The moral implications, however, are clearer. The sheer scale of civilian casualties and the devastation inflicted on urban centers raised profound questions about humanitarian principles and the justification of such extreme measures. This legacy continues to challenge our understanding of modern warfare. The strategic bombing campaigns irrevocably demonstrated the immense destructive power and strategic importance of air forces, fundamentally reshaping military doctrines for generations to come. Air power had arrived as a dominant, independent force. Moreover, the atomic bombings heralded a terrifying new era, the nuclear age. These events irrevocably altered international relations and the very concept of global security, leaving an enduring shadow over humanity. To continue exploring the pivotal moments that shaped our world and understand the profound impact of history on our present, subscribe and join our growing community of history enthusiasts. The strategic bombing campaigns of World War II left an indelible mark on the landscape of war and human morality. What aspect of these complex campaigns resonates with you the most? Or what questions do they raise for you? Share your thoughts and insights in the comments below.